Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good whatever time of day it is and whatever part of the world you're at. Welcome back. And today we're going to do a lesson on geometry, and we're going to focus on the distance and the midpoint formula and how to apply those. So let's go ahead and jump on in. So first, what is the distance formula? Well, distance formula states that d, the distance, is equal to the square root, right, of the difference of the x's squared plus the difference of the y's squared. And I'll show you what that means. So, for example, you'll have 2 points, and both of those points have coordinates, an x coordinate and a y coordinate. And what you need to do is find the difference of those coordinates. So, for example, you may have a point where you have x1, y1, right, and x2 and y2. Okay, so you'll have some points, you'll have to label them, and then you would plug those numbers into the formula and work it out using the order operations, and you would come up with your answer for the distance. Now, midpoint is its own separate formula. So midpoint, and the midpoint formula is going to actually give you coordinates to a midpoint. So to find the midpoint formula, you add both of the x values and then you divide by 2. And then you do the same thing for the y values. Add both of the y values, then you divide by 2. Okay? So now, before we go any further, I do want to just mention that when you see the distance formula, there is another way to write it. Some people, instead of x1 going first, you might see people do x2 minus x1 and then y2 minus y1. That's correct. As long as the coordinate, whatever point you use first, you have to use the x and y coordinate first each time. Okay, so the main thing here is either it's going to be x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared, or you'll see it how I initially wrote it, where I had x1, right, x1 minus x2 and y1 minus y2. Okay. All right. So let's talk about the application. For numbers 1 and 2, they want us to find the midpoint and the distance. So we're gonna do the distance first. All right. So using the distance formula. Now, in geometry, whenever you get ready to take a test, most times they don't give you the distance formula. That's something they expect you to memorize. So what I would suggest is, while you're working these problems out, every time you have to use a formula, write it again. So before you do anything, you want to label your points: x1, y1, x2, y2. Now let me write my formula. So that's x1 minus x2 squared plus y1 minus y2 squared, and all of that's going to be square rooted. Now I'm just going to plug numbers in and use the order operations to figure out my answer. So this is going to be 3 minus negative 10. Oh, excuse me, not negative 10, but negative 1. Right, because x1 is 3, x2 is negative 1. Okay, and then we have plus y1 is 4 minus y2, which is 10. Okay, now you already see that when the number is negative, you have to write it as a negative. Okay, and I should put parentheses around it. So now you should already know that when we get ready to evaluate this, those two negatives, that's going to turn into a plus. So that's really 3 plus 1, which becomes 4. So this is going to become the square root of 4 squared plus 4 minus 10 is negative 6. So we got to put negative 6 in parentheses and square it. Okay? So we have 4 squared plus negative 6 squared. 4 squared is 16. And negative 6 squared is positive 36. Okay? Now we add those together. That's going to become 52. And we need to simplify 52. We can factor it. Any even number can always be divided by 2, but we can make it higher. We can actually divide by 4. So I can rewrite the square root of 52 to be the square root of 4 times the square root of 13. Okay, because 4 times 13 is 52. And now we chose 4 and 13 because 4 is a perfect square. The square root of 4, is 2. So this would be 2 square root 13. That would be our final answer for the distance of number 1. So AB, the distance of A to B, is 2 square root 13. Okay. Now, as we stated before, we have to go ahead and find the midpoint as well. So I'm going to erase all of that. Now we're going to do the midpoint. So once again, we start off x1, y1, x2, y2. The midpoint is equal to x1 plus x2 divided by 2, comma, y1 plus y2 divided by 2. And now we just go ahead and work that out. So the midpoint is equal to 3 plus negative 1 divided by 2, comma, 4 plus 10 divided by 2, okay? So when we simplify that, the midpoint is going to be, for the x value, is going to be 2 divided by 2, and for the y value is going to be 14 divided by 2, okay? And last but not least, we simplify all of that. That's going to become 1 comma, positive 1 comma, positive 7. So our midpoint is 1 comma 7. Okay? And that's how you apply the formulas. So let's take a look at number 2. Now number 2 is asking us, once again, we still have to find the distance in the midpoint. So first, we need to actually identify the points. P, which is going to be 1, 2, 3. So that's negative 3 on the x. And then 1, 2, 3, 4. Negative 4 on the y. So P is negative 3, negative 4. And then we're going to do Q. And we always identify things in math from left to right. Now Q is 1, 2, so positive 2, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, positive 5. So Q is 2, comma 5. Now we want to go ahead and just label our points: x1, y1, x2, y2, x1, y1, x2, y2. Now let's go ahead and do our distance formula. Right, and we want to practice on memorizing it, so we're just gonna rewrite it each time. All right, anytime when you're first learning a formula in mathematics, and most formulas they expect you to memorize them, they're not gonna give it to you. Rewrite it every time you use it. So x1 is negative 3, x2 is positive 2. So negative 3 minus 2 squared, plus then we have negative 4 minus 5 squared. That's going to give us d is equal to the square root of negative 5 squared plus negative 9 squared. Now, negative 5 squared is positive 25, so d is equal to the square root of 25 plus 81. Because negative 9 squared means negative 9 times negative 9, which is positive 81. When we finish adding, That's going to become, what's that, 81 is 6. So 106. 106. Square root of 106 cannot be simplified. Excuse me. So it is already in its simplest form. So we would just leave this as the square root of 106. Okay. Now, last but not least, let's go ahead and find our midpoint. Okay. Now, when we do our midpoint, let's write the formula. MP equals, we're going to add both of the x's and then divide by 2. And we're going to do the same thing for the y's. Add both the y's and divide by 2. So MP is equal to -3 plus 2 divided by 2. And the other one is going to be -4 plus 5 divided by 2. -3 plus 2 is -1. So that's going to leave us with -1/2, comma, +1/2. So our midpoint is going to be -1/1/2, comma, +1/2. All right. And that, ladies and gentlemen, will conclude this video on distance formula and midpoint formula. Have a great day.